CFC St. Moritz Mountain Talks.
I'm here to the CFC St. Moritz Mountain Talks here live from the CFC St. Moritz 2026. And I'm sitting here with Chris Giancarlo, former CFTC chairman and from our point of view, a proud ambassador to the CFC St. Moritz. So Chris, welcome.
From my point of view as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. So Chris, before we start, I was amazed by your skills of playing instruments and sing. So can you tell me, is that something in your family, or where is that passion coming from?
Yeah, so I've played music since I was a child. I studied piano and guitar is my primary instrument. I also play the banjo as well, and I've played in bands since I was a youngster, and since elementary school, secondary school, and I continue to play today. I've got a small band back in New Jersey that we call the Crypto Kings. Not the Gypsy Kings, the Crypto Kings.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. So, Chris, just to set the stage a little bit, since 4 years now at the conference, we always had topics like CBDCs first, with a focus on that, stablecoin a little bit less, now completely changed, right, to stablecoin. So, from your perspective, if we can give them like a relationship, how would you describe that between CBDCs and stablecoins? Is there a relationship, and if so, how you?
Yeah, I think there very much is a relationship, but I also think that it's natural that the topics for an important conference like this, you bring together some of the most prominent people in the industry, evolves as the industry is evolving, right? And as I talked about in my when I was on stage on Wednesday. Certainly, the United States has seen a dramatic change in the last 12 months. I mean, as dramatic as you can get, 180-degree change from an unannounced but certainly official policy of the Biden administration to suppress crypto. Now we're in a very much announced and official stage of promoting digital asset innovation. You're absolutely right about a relationship between stablecoins and CBDCs. Now, as I think many people watching this podcast understand, both CBDCs and stablecoins are the placing of money on digital rails, on digital networks. The difference is that CBDCs are actually a sovereign obligation of an issuer, of a nation state, of a sovereign. Stablecoins are the obligation of their issuer, a stablecoin company or a bank. Now, behind the stablecoins may be holdings of government securities. In the case that we'll turn to the Stablecoin Act in a second, there may be holdings of securities, but they're not obligations of the sovereign, right? So if you think about in the analog world, you can have cash that's in your pocket that's actually an obligation of the government. You can have a treasury bill that is an actual obligation of the government. Or you can have money in the bank that is not an obligation of the government. And if the bank fails, that money is likely to be gone. Now, there very likely is government insurance or a government backstop, but it's not the same thing as an obligation of the government. That's the analog world. In the digital world, we have CBDCs and stablecoins. Now, the United States is taking the approach that they're going to lead with stablecoins in terms of creating a digital network version of the dollar. And I think that's what was determined in our Genius Act that passed last May. I think it's the right approach because at least from an American point of view, we believe that only the private sector can do the level of innovation and technology development that will make American-based stablecoins technologically sophisticated enough to attract the type of usage they need. Now, others feel differently, and Europe is taking a different approach.
That's the second question I would have, yeah. So
they're leading with a form of CBDC that's really bank account-based as opposed to truly tokenized. And it doesn't surprise me. And it doesn't surprise me because I think in Europe there's a greater reliance on governments and the central government, in this case, the European Union. When I say Europe, I'm referring to the EU, of course.
Yeah.
The other reason, though, I think that Europe is going this route is more of a political one. As many people know, one of the great successes of the European Union was the euro. It was successful not just in terms of getting all the member states to adopt it. It was successful, and it was a moment of cohesion for Europe. And at a time right now where I think the EU is facing some questions of political legitimacy, the leadership is, I think there's a hope that a digital euro may be another euro moment of the one of 30 years ago to maybe create some cohesion. We'll see if that's the case, but I think that's one of the driving factors in their decision to pursue a CBDC as opposed to a stablecoin approach.
Let's discuss it if the euro was a success, right? In if we see what Spain is going through in Portugal and everything, or France compared to Germany, that's, I think, like separate discussion. But I think here it's really like, I mean, if you talk about like that through a stable coin, like a digital network for the dollar or of the dollar, right? I mean, the reaction of the EU could be what you say, of course, like a moment to have a cohesion moment again. But isn't it also like a reaction to kind of, okay, we don't want the dollarization of the whole European Union because, well, what can we do with our banking system then, right?
I think so. I think that the U.S. advancement under the Genius Act with dollar-based stablecoins, which are 99% of stablecoins and issues right now, indicates that the future of internet commerce, of digitally networked transactions, is likely to be dollar-based. And as I understand the digital euro project, which is not really tokenization, it's account-based, I don't think it's going to defeat the dollar as becoming, and I'm not sure that's really what's intended right now. I truly do think Europe is looking to perhaps have another euro moment. So it's maybe more focused toward a domestic audience than it is focused on an international audience.
Maybe just to go, and we go into the Genius Act also, because you said something really interesting last year at the conference, but just to make or to go a step back, and if you can answer that, right? But how much was the Genius Act like politically motivated, like geopolitically motivated? Because I mean, that's a weapon. I would say maybe it's weapon. It's the wrong word, but again, I mean,
absolutely
right.
The Genius. Let's just actually set the stage for the significance of the Genius Act, first in U.S. politics and then international politics. We have not had major financial service legislation by Congress since 2010 with the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act, which was signed by President Obama. That is 15 years ago. The Genius Act was the first piece of major financial service legislation in 15 years, significant of itself. Equally remarkable, it was passed within 5 months of a new administration, and it received bipartisan support. So clearly, there were strong dynamics. Now, anytime you have something like this, there are a few people that stand out as having led it, and one is Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, a former classmate of mine, a dear friend of mine, really showed remarkable leadership in making this a bipartisan bill and getting it done in a remarkable period of time. I think the reason he was able to do that, Bill Hagerty was a candidate for Secretary of State in the Trump administration, very much internationalist, former ambassador to Japan. I think Hagerty was able to tell his fellow senators about the international ramifications of tokenizing the dollar in the form of stablecoins and unleashing the technological capability of the industry we're here with today, the crypto industry, to build the dollar and to power it. And so I think in many ways they got it right. I have a few issues with the Genius Act. I'm not satisfied with the privacy protections in it. I think it extends the degree of surveillance over financial transactions that was begun with something called the Bank Secrecy Act of the 1970s in America. But aside from that, I think it actually was I think it was quite genius in many ways.
Yeah.
And I think only time will tell, but I would imagine that when we're here at the 15th CFC conference, it will become clear that the dollar is the reference currency for the Internet of Finance.
Okay.
And I think we'll be able to trace that back to the passage of the Genius Act.
Back like 15, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year at the conference, you mentioned or you described the US roadmap. It should be like 3 phases, right?
Yes.
So the first one, it should be like ending hostility. Then the second would be fulfilling promises. And the third would be building policy that can actually survive political cycles.
Yes.
So if you look now with the Genius Act, with what we discuss at the moment in the industry, but especially the Genius Act, will it survive political cycles? Are we in that third step already, or
Yes.
Where do you see
Yeah.
it?
So I'm glad to say I think those 3 cycles have played out. The very first one was ending the hostility, and that was achieved really within the first week by simply sacking those appointees by the Biden administration, like Gary Gensler's and others, who had really directed the hostility to crypto. The second stage of fulfilling promises, the Genius Act is clearly one of those. One is creating a Bitcoin reserve, which is happening through the government stopping the sales of Bitcoin that they do in law enforcement seizures all the time. But then making durable crypto policy. And I think that because the Genius Act was able to get bipartisan support, meaning both parties supported it, not 100%, but because it was supported by both the Republicans and Democrats, because the bill, I think, is a very comprehensive, pretty thorough bill, and now all the rules that need to be written by the government agencies are being written. I think the Genius Act now stands. It's very hard to undo these things once they're built, and now we have major institutions like Circle, like Tether, like Paxos building compliant, Genius compliant stablecoin frameworks. I don't think that's good. And of course, the banks are doing it as well. So I think this is built to be very durable.
So before we go then to kind of the reactions on that Genius Act, like globally, just like let's go back to your, how you say, to your comment about privacy, right? I mean, what is the biggest concern from your side? Because as a Swiss, I mean, we're really like we like our privacy and so on. So what is the biggest threat there, or what are your biggest concerns in relation to the Genius Act?
Well, I'm going to go beyond the Genius Act in my answer. In the Western democratic tradition, we citizens have been entangling with our governments, at least as far back as Magna Carta in the 1200s, to determine what's the right balance between individual liberty and privacy and the government's right to conduct law enforcement. There's this in English law notion of a person's home is their castle, and whatever goes on behind closed doors is their business. However, there's an exception to that. If you're committing a crime behind your closed doors, the government have the right, if they have probable cause to believe you're doing the wrong thing, to break down your door. I imagine the same applies, some form of this in Switzerland. It's certainly true in the continent of Europe. It's true in Britain. It's true in the United States. We've enshrined a right to privacy in our Constitution, the Fourth Amendment. And even it is not absolute. It recognizes that there's a balance between privacy and law enforcement. Unfortunately, starting in the 1970s, accelerated after 9/11, our government has used various powers to have much greater degree of surveillance over financial transactions, whether or not there's a likelihood of criminal activity. It's almost as if financial transactions are surveilled today in order to stop crime in case it takes place, not when there's suspicion that it's actually taking place. We've given up our privacy, and as we now go into a digital world, too many of us have traded privacy for convenience. We give away our data, and I tip my hat to the EU, where they have a Data Privacy Act, which protects us from commercial invasion of our privacy, but doesn't protect you from government invasion of privacy. In the United States, we're far more concerned about government invasion, or we certainly make lip service to that, and yet we give away all our data commercially. My disappointment in the Genius Act is that it expanded the Bank Secrecy Act to cover stablecoin transactions. At the end of the day, Nicolo, I truly believe that the winner of national societies in the digital future of finance is not going to be the ones that develop the best digital rails, but the one that makes sure the digital economy and it truly reflects their values. So we know with China's digital yuan that it's a control instrument. If you criticize the regime, your money will be turned off. You will not be able to take train out of your village. And they make no bones about it. That's what it does. It's a control instrument. It reflects their expectation of the role of government, and certainly of the role of the Communist Party. If you listen carefully to a lot of EU ministers and BIS ministers, they make quite clear that they want to use the digital euro to be able to surveil all transactions. It's been said by Augustin Carstens that they want to know where every euro goes. So it's not a control instrument in the Chinese sense, it's a surveillance instrument.
Which is like a small line between it, probably, right? Exactly. Sorry.
No, absolutely. I'm hopeful that in the United States, we can get a better balance so that surveillance is only done when there's probable cause. However, I'm not pleased with the Genius bill on that account. And based upon where we are as you and I sit here on the drafting of the Clarity Act, it looks like, unfortunately, privacy is not as enshrined as it should be as well. This government surveillance seems to be creeping into every type of digital transaction. And that's a great disappointment to me as someone who believes that liberty is the greatest gift that Western democratic societies have passed on to the children and grandchildren. We need to make sure we continue to do that.
Yeah, and because it's based on technology, you cannot just turn it down, right? I mean, that's not a big change also to everything that happened like decades ago, where you had the communism that could control you based on like physical controls and everything. But now you have a technology underlying that can track everything. So absolutely with you on that.
American founder Thomas Jefferson said, it seems like every few generations have to refight for their liberty once again. And I think that, we, the cyberpunk generation, I'm not me, but our colleagues of the cyberpunk generation need to take up that fight.
Do you think that there is like a chance to fight that now that is everything like with the technology, like underlined with technology?
Well,
it's more a philosophical
it is
question.
philosophical. One of the things that's happened is, sadly, but the big American banks, I think the big global banks, have found that the anti-money laundering regime, what we call AML, KYC regime, has been good for business. Why is that? Because it builds moats around the business, right? If you're a small firm, to build up that infrastructure to do that is very hard. So having gotten used to doing it, they don't want to give it up. There's much better ways of doing law enforcement and anti-tax evasion and law enforcement than the way we do it now. AML KYC is a terrible system. I know from my time in government, I've seen the statistics on how few crimes it actually prevents. 99% of the SARS filed are false positives. It's a terrible system, and yet we all pretend the emperor has his clothes on. Well, you know the Grimm story, Brothers Grimm, about the emperor with no clothes. Yes. The emperor has no clothes when it comes to AML KYC, but we pretend he does.
Yeah. Good. So let's just go back to the discussion that we had before. I mean, with the Genius Act, it's pretty obvious what you also said, like that there was also geopolitical angle to it, right? Bipartisan agreement. So, I mean, it's not only the US that is pushing frameworks forward, right? So there is a reaction from Europe. I mean, China clearly comes with their system, with the Silk Road, that they want to like power through the digital renminbi. So, I mean, where does that lead, right? I mean, blockchain was something designed for openness, interoperability. I mean, all that, let's say, the approach that we had. So do we go back, or are we going to a system that is just isolated per currency, per country? Where do you see that going?
I think a common intellectual trap we fall into is to somehow think that the digital future is going to be somehow less complex than the analog past.
Yes.
In fact, I think it's going to be more complex. And I meet L1 maximistas all the time that somehow think that the whole world is going to collapse down to Solana or Ethereum. Or it's not going to be. In the analog past, how many credit card offers do we have? You had banks' own cards. You got Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, Diners Club. I mean, why do we need all? Because they all found an addressable market that they were able to serve. I think the same thing is going to happen in the future. And our economies are not all the same. So I think an L1 that works for a sophisticated, multifaceted economy like the United States may be very different than in Central Europe, or very different than in Africa. I think there are going to be payment systems that work very well in Africa that don't take off in Europe or in the United States. So I think the digital future is going to be very complex. I think you're going to have great regional differences because China wants to make sure. In fact, if you study the Chinese Communist Party mandate, it's very clear that the party assumes a great control over the economy and over financial transactions. They must be the lead, of the spear when it comes to financial activity. And so control is going to be very, very important in China. Now, in the United States, for example, we have a different balance between the private sector and the public sector. And the belief is when it comes to innovation, that should be led out of the private sector. Europe, I think Europe is reconsidering the degree to which the the public sector has dominated innovation because of its lack of growth. And I think we're probably likely to see, in reaction to what I expect to be 4 to 5% economic growth in 2026 in the United States, I think Europe is going to say we need to scale back some of this regulatory straitjacket that we've put on the economy. So I just think you're going to see a great deal of divergence long before we get to global standards.
Just coming back to that point, so like for me to understand it. So if I'm China, if I'm Europe, if now the US dollar stable coin is coming into my markets, makes it really hard for me to, I mean, if it's really used as that, I mean, what do you do as European Union? Are you just banning like US pegged stable coins, or what is the reaction then? Or and that's why my question about, do we have then like isolated monetary zones where you ban certain currencies or stable coins or CBDCs? What is there? Like,
I think that would really be a huge mistake. I mean, I think that would be a tremendous mistake. You know, I'm not a lifelong critic of Europe. I'm a great lover of Europe. I trace my roots back to Italy and to Central Europe, and my affection for the continent of Europe, for the culture of Europe, is direct. But I do think Europe is in a by Europe I'm referring to the EU primarily. It has to reconsider the throttling of its economy brought about by deindustrialization, by some of its extreme green policies in other areas. Now, I know members of the Trump administration have been vocal about this, so I don't need to add to that, but I'll just add to it on the economic side. The only way out of is through economic growth, and Europe has to rediscover economic. Cutting itself off, it would be a huge mistake. I think its only answer is to compete with Europe. And goodness knows, I mean, the amount of academic talent, the great universities, the great pure research science that comes out of European universities is enormous. I think you maintain very aspirational younger people that are dying. I think what's needed is perhaps a degree of political change. The political class that's dominating things are not in touch with their younger generation.
yeah.
That are emigrating or doing work out of the UAE now,
Yep.
or
Yep.
Singapore, or others, because they can't create companies.
Yep.
So things have to change. I think they will. And I think that will then contribute to the development of this new digital network technology of finance.
So what would you imagine if we, let's say we have now the Euro CBDC, we have now stable coins, US denominated stable coins. So how it could such a system work without like being too geopolitical? I mean, how can Europe like use the stable coins, US and vice versa? Where do you see a way that could work together?
I'm confident we're going to figure it out. If our governments are not thick-headed about this, I think we'll make it work out. We managed to do it in the analog system. We'll do it in the new system. I don't know exactly how it all plays out. I'm on the board of Digital Asset, which is the development arm for the Canton network, which is rolling out almost virally amongst major financial institutions. And just in the last 24 hours announced that now the London Stock Exchange is going to be building on the Canton network. I think except for perhaps the Chinese and the Belt and Road Initiative, I think the free market economies are going to develop common standards for financial transaction movement. And I think you're probably going to wind up with at least a short to medium term digital future. The overlying digital networks are going to overlay the roots of the analog networks. So it's funny, you could see a map of European roads and they're all overlaid the old Roman roads. The major European highways follow the routes that the Romans evolved. And that's like a metaphor for the way I think you're going to see the digital networks roll out. I think they're going to follow commercial routes and money transfer routes that currently exists. In fact, in many ways, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative was meant to try to create a new set of roads to compete with those that are dominated by the dollar and the euro. And I think we talk about the Eurozone, the dollar zone. I think we'll see now digital networks overlaid along those. Money will move faster. The velocity of money is going to be greater, which is very stimulative to an economy. Let me give you one statistic that I find very interesting. It's been estimated that the cost of moving money in the analog world, so the cost of operating correspondent banking system, absorbs between 1% to 2% of the global GDP. If we get that 1% to 2% back, I'll just give it to Europe. I mean, if I could. I mean, just that alone should be able to empower our economies to get away from negative traction toward global traction. So I think this new digital network financial system has a great deal of opportunity for all of us to adopt it and benefit from it.
Good, Chris. Thank you very much for all these insights. Last important question. So, what happens with the band then? Are you planning to go on a tour, or, I mean, I don't know if you retire.
We'll be back here at St. Moritz next year, so you never know what happens there.
Good. So we play again together.
Yeah, we play it again for sure. We'll play again.
Perfect. So, Chris, thank you very much for this conversation. Really appreciate that you took the time. And that's it from our side, from the CFC St. Moritz Mountain Talks. Thank you very much for your attention and have a nice day.